It's
Mark and Pete.
Hello, and welcome to the show. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This is the show dedicated to religion, politics and business. Each week, we take a key topical subject. Well, this week, we're going to ask the question, how do you stop fraudsters? It's alarming to think that nearly 200,000 people in Britain alone, with an average age of 74, have been seen on so-called suckers list. This is essentially those people who have been targeted by fraudsters. They're potential victims. And it's quite remarkable how each year more and more victims seem to appear on the list. Is there a way of actually solving these problems? What can be done? By the authorities, by the people themselves. With me today is clergyman Pete. So Pete, are you on a suckers list?
Well, I hope not. The thing about being a victim of fraud is not only do you lose money, or whatever it is you've been defrauded of, you also lose a bit of self-esteem because you feel a bit of an idiot. You feel like a sucker, as you so eloquently put it. I don't think I'm on any suckers list. As a clergyman, one of the things that people target you for is to give money to various causes. People come to your door, sometimes because they're quite obviously homeless and destitute and need some help, in which case they will get help. But I was once someone once came to my door and asked for money to fill up their car with petrol. And when I saw their car, I thought that's quite a good car. What I would do if I were you is sell that expensive car and get a cheaper one.
Yes.
For plenty of money. So, in fact, I didn't give any money on that occasion. So, I'm usually pretty careful. Although, of course, like anyone else, I can be a sucker for a sob story.
Yes. Well, this particular story is something that has been talked about in the media quite a lot. Of course, it's not just old people that are victims of these issues. There are many what's called boiler rooms. These are essentially bogus companies who target a list of, maybe sort of innocent people. Now, whether that's via direct mail, whether that's via the internet, and many other means to try and con people out of their earnings. Now, of course, this is something that is perceived to be for people who are of the elderly. Maybe it's because perhaps they're not so familiar with some of the techniques. Perhaps they're not so worldly wise because they're not so familiar with some of the things that fraudsters can do today. I have a little poem which sort of sums up the sad sob story. This is called Shaggy Dog Story, The Perils of Being a Pensioner. Old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard, since retiring her weary old bones. When she got there, her pension was bare, a victim of a falling Dow Jones. She went to the lawyer to get some advice, who said long-term investments are like rolling a dice. She went to the banker to get a bridging loan, but all that she heard was a voice that would moan. She went to the mayor for some public support, to find he jetted merrily away to a fine luxury resort. She went to the chief of police with the evidence of crime, to discover that he was contempt of court and now serving time. She went to the vicar in the hope of divine inspiration, to find he'd been sent to hell with his entire congregation. Eventually, she went to see a man about a dog, to wreak revenge on all those that blame. But the beast was far too ferocious, and soon became very hard to tame. Quickly unleashed, the dog launched an attack. It lapped up the lying lawyer, bit the bad banker, mauled the merry mayor, amputated the arm of the law, collared the vicar's dog collar, and finally turned and devoured every sinew and bones of poor Mother Hubbard. So the moral of the story is that for each con trick, every dog has its day, and life makes you feel sick.
Well, I guess that, yes, that is a bit sickening. Yeah,
It's a sad story, but it is incredible that that year after year after year, people have lost money. In fact, on a recent survey, some nearly 11,000 people have lost money, which on average equates to just over £1,000 each. Of course, there are individuals where con artists have literally taken tens of thousands of pounds, whether it's these scams on winning money and you have to sort of give a donation to activate your winnings. I mean, what can be done to stop these fraudsters?
Well, I think there are things that you can put in place to make it more difficult for them to get away with it. One thing that you can do is educate people about the sort of scams that are coming up, in much the same way as the information about the latest virus for your operating system or software in your computer gets advertised and gets spread around, before the virus actually arrives, hopefully. It would be a good idea, I guess, to tell people about the latest scams. I mean, that does happen, but not as much, not in such a targeted manner as it does with computer viruses. And I think this would be a very good method to enable people to spot possible scams. Forewarned is forearmed. The other thing you can do, of course, is to make punishment for such behaviour, especially stronger. The punishment especially stronger, because you don't need to just take into account how much was stolen, but how much effect emotionally, for example, you have on the victim.
Yes.
So if it's a scam in which you humiliate the victim, you get a proportionally higher punishment. I guess that is done to a certain extent, in that you wouldn't get a lenient measure of punishment, be it a fine or be it imprisonment, if you'd obviously been heartless. But I think it would be a good idea to introduce some sort of scale of increasing the punishment that can be delivered through the courts if you've obviously been involved in a purposeful scam targeting defenceless or vulnerable members of society, for example, the elderly.
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, and I use the reference to my dear mother Hubbard here, but National Trading Standards team estimates that it has actually saved consumers more than £5 million over the last years tackling the issues. But I think it's more around this better awareness, as you say. Also, the advice by the Trading Standards team is urging people to look after relatives and neighbours who perhaps might be perceived to be vulnerable, particularly from marketing scams. So this is where, for example, if a direct mail piece comes through your door and it seems almost incredible, the opportunities and the offers that are there, where you have every chance to either win something, or perhaps all you need to do is divulge some simple bit of data, which unfortunately could mean that somebody could either change your identity. And it's those type of things that really are quite important, that it is about an education. But how do you actually target people? Because ironically, you want to educate people, but what's the best way of doing that?
Well, I think it is through personal relationships. You were talking there about how you could get in touch with friends and relatives, and churches can play their role here, of getting to know people, part of your church community, part of your neighbourhood. See the people who are vulnerable and warn them about the sort of things to watch out for, especially the current trend in identity theft, which wasn't such a problem years ago. So if you are not familiar with the changing way in which identity can be used in order to access funds, then you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to give up information that you shouldn't.
Yes.
Because you don't know that it's important. So this sort of thing, this sort of information, and as well as specific information that I was talking about earlier about particular scams that are going on at the moment, if you hear about it, so tell your friends, relatives, tell your community, whatever that is, if it's a church community, and particularly vulnerable people. The reason why I think it's good done on that one-to-one basis for vulnerable people, people who have mental difficulties, people who are young, or people who are old, whatever the vulnerable characteristic is, is because in that situation you could be, depending on what your vulnerability is, you could be overly frightened.
Yes.
You could be thinking, oh no, people are out to get me, and start to become paranoid. So it needs to be done in a sensitive manner, in a way that shows that it's not that worrying, but it's something just to watch out for, and just to offer help as well where needed. You can say, come back and ask me if you're uncertain about anything.
Well, I think the important point here is as you sort of alluded to at the beginning, which is this feeling of embarrassment. I think the important point here is if you know that, or you think that you've been conned in some way, is don't feel embarrassed to contact the police or the National Trading Standards in any way, because the point here is there's also that sense of responsibility to report a crime. So although you may feel a little bit guilty, sad, and clearly you've been affected in some way, but it is important not to let it go, because if you do, it just gives more power to the fraudsters.
Yes, and these the people who are fraudsters, they really are behaving very badly. I mean, the Bible warns very specifically about this sort of behaviour. It talks about fraud in very strong language, law against it. You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. Leviticus 19:11 is that particular reference. That not steal. You mustn't deal falsely. Fraud is just ruled out.
Yes.
And we were talking about vulnerable people being targeted, and particularly the elderly. And the Bible is riven through with the importance of respect for the elderly that in Western culture, and this in this way they are superior to Western culture in this way, in that they've got that right. And of course, the culture in which the Bible grew up, where it was written, was one of this Oriental idea of the importance of respect for the elderly. And I guess it was across all societies, but we've somehow lost it. And in the Bible, it time and time again refers to this as actually being something that God requires. Leviticus 19:32 is the one reference I've pulled up. You shall stand up before the grey head and honour the face of an old man. And it links that with fearing God. If you're going to fear God, you must stand up. Stand up when an elderly person is present. You've got to respect them. And these two things together, fraud is wrong. Respecting old people is right. The fraudster who targets old people is in a very bad way when it comes to standing up to God on Judgment Day. But I can't see a way of stopping it happening. I think that what we've been talking about can mean that more will be caught to make it more difficult for people to be defrauded. But in the end, it's still going to happen. So we want, as you were saying, Mark, to make sure that people come forward when they've been a victim and to catch out people who are fraudsters, because they should be caught and they should be punished severely.
Yes, but I think that there's something there that I want to pick up on what you said, which is this point of respect. Interestingly, what I've seen is that in society, and I see this in business sometimes, that you're right, in certain parts of Asia and in the Middle East, there is a greater respect, I believe, for people of a certain age group. Partly through this idea that they have more experience, they have the knowledge, which could, of course, be passed on. And so that in itself is of value to society. In the West, and particularly in Europe, I see it less. I trade in different parts of the world, and what I do see is that certainly if I were to compare, say, for example, the 1980s to where we are today in the 21st century, I see that there's a generation of disrespect coming through, where perhaps this idea that, you're old, you're not respected as much, in some cases perceived not to be able to add as value. And maybe with that perceived vulnerability, there is that exploitation. when I was at school, there was a strong emphasis taught to me through either actually the local vicar who would come along to the school, give Bible readings, and put a lot of emphasis, strangely enough, on actually respecting your elders. It was a concept that this phrase, you must respect your elders. Well, of course, when you're a child, you think, well, why? Well, that is then installed in you, and when somebody takes you through the journey of life, whether that's sort of respect the local policeman, respect your local teacher, respect the vicar, and so on. I wonder whether that really has sort of eroded over time, and maybe that's part of the problem.
I think it is part of the problem. Yeah, the lack of respect for authority, the reduction in honour and respect for older people goes together. And that allows people to be more likely to want to target the elderly, because of course there if you've got an easy target group and you remove the pressure on you to not target them, then of course you're going to go ahead and do it. And therefore we need to really target the fraudsters.
Yes.
The problem being, if you're committing a fraud and you offer something that someone really wants, they tend to ignore the improbability of it being offered because of how much they want what's offered, and that's the problem with it. That however much you try and guard against it, it's still going to be successful. And as you say, if you have a lack of respect for any sort of authority, you're going to have a disrespect of the elderly, and so the abuse of the elderly, in this case through fraud, is going to happen. Just want to say that this particular problem of defrauding the elderly is a spiritual problem at the heart of the people who are committing it, such that they really need to fear for their lives, because when it comes to Judgment Day, just imagine how you would behave if you were the ultimate judge. Someone who, in order to make financial gain, took advantage of someone who didn't even understand what they were doing, and someone who you should have been respecting. Just think of the level of betrayal that shows. And I really wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
No, but there's an irony there, isn't there? Because ironically, whilst they're conning people of all walks of life, young or old, they're actually conning themselves when they sit in front of God on that judgment day, because they're conning themselves out of what really would be a better way of life. So, listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you been a victim of a fraudster? Have you been conned in some way? Let us know. Why not drop us a line on markandpete.com, fill out the contact form, and let us know. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.